And then we also have the experience curve effect. Now, a lot of students get confused with the experience curve and the learning curve. They think, well, hey, it's the same thing. You know, the more experience I get, the cheaper or the less per unit cost as I increase production. That's partially true. The way that you differentiate between the experience curve effect and the learning effect is that the experience curve is actually a combination of the learning effect and economies of scale. So the slide says the systematic lowering of the cost structure and consequent unit cost production that occur over the life of a product because of both economies of scale and learning effects. So once down the experience curve, the company is likely to have a significant cost advantage. Why? Because the more I produce, the more I can spread my fixed costs, the more discounts I have, the more specialized I become. That's the economy of scale portion. But the more I produce, the more repetitious the task is, the less time and resource I'm going to require. And so my whole cost curve is also going to decrease. So I'm going to have both factors occurring. The cost structure is going to be lowered, and the consequent unit costs are going to be reduced over a period of time because both economies of scale and learning effect is occurring. So the significance of this experience curve is that as a company's product volume and market share increases, the more I produce of a certain product, the more market share I have. Let's say, you know, widgets, the more people buy my widgets, the more economies of scale I have, the more learning effect I have, and therefore the lower my cost structure will be. And the lower my cost structure will be, guess what? The more value I could potentially create for my customers by lowering my price. All right? So that's the benefit of the learning curve effect, the experience curve effect, and economies of scale. Something very significant, however, and this is the graph that you see. Whereas learning effect and economies of scale was the output over time. This is actually accumulated output over time. So this kind of takes us over a time frame where as we produce more over a period of time. We see this systematic lowering because we're learning more, we're doing it over and over, and we're producing more volume. So as we accumulate this experience of production, we get both the benefits of economies of scale and the learning effect. And competitors that are coming in that are new to the industry don't have that. It's almost like, you know, when you see when you hear about a person fresh out of school and they're trying to learn something on the job and they just can't do it as well as somebody who's been doing it for 20 years. It's not just because that person is more learned in that process, yes, and it's not just because that person has done it over and over and now is very specialized at it, and so also the investment that they made in learning it is now being shared across more units. Their fixed cost, i.e., is being reduced. But what essentially has occurred is over time, these economies of scale and learning effect have become more and more pronounced. And so somebody who is learning, who's now, I should say, now beginning the process, has to play catch up. And it's difficult to play catch up because you have to essentially gather all that experience that obviously took time. And that's why newcomers are sometimes very, very in a great disadvantageous position relative to pioneers or established firms, because they cannot make up this experience curve effect. But complacency can occur with this experience effect. For example, let's use this example of the newcomer coming into the organization, and this person who has been here for 20 years and using the same, let's use an accounting example. Let's say somebody was accounting and doing journal entries by hand for 20 years. And so they have fantastic experience when it comes to that, definite experiential, I should say, advantage relative to a newcomer doing this process because they've been doing it. And so they have the learning effect, they've got economies of scale. However, that experience effect is not necessarily always going to create an advantage. Why? Well, at some point in time, the experience curve is likely to bottom out. What do we mean by that? As I showed you, economies of scale do not continue infinitely. There is a point in time where the bureaucratic costs increase from additional units, surpass the incremental cost advantage or cost decrease that comes from economies of scale. At that point in time, you're going to have diseconomies. So that experience effect is going to feel that, because the economy of scale is an ingredient, if you will, to the experience curve. The other problem that, or the other contributing factor to the experience curve bottoming out, is that the learning effect tends to increase, but increase at a decreasing rate the more that you repeat a task. So for example, you might have found yourself, like when you start to go to the gym, that the first couple of weeks or the first month or so that you worked out, you saw drastic changes. You saw, I mean, you changed, you dropped enormous amounts of weight. You start to look great. But as you continue the same exercise over and over and over again, the benefits of that exercise tended to decrease. You still saw some benefit, but it was not nearly as great as an effect as you had in the first month. And we explain that based upon muscles becoming familiar with the exercise, and because of that familiarity, there is not so much more that one can benefit from doing it. So that's why you have your P90X, and they try to create this confusion where you're trying to learn new stuff. The same thing happens with a firm. There's only, after the 100 or 200 time you did a journal entry, there's only so much more you could learn. And so the learning effect tends to decrease the more you do it. So again, you're learning more, you're just not learning as much at the rate that you were learning in the initial stages. That's why it's likely to bottom out. The other thing that can really create havoc with the experience, and you can see this, there's a lot of evidence for this, especially these days, is when technology makes experience effects obsolete. I've used this example in class before, but there is nobody now or even then that is better than Blockbuster when it comes to physical movie rentals. They definitely had an experience curve advantage when it came to the physical brick and mortar, going to the store, renting your movie experience. However, with Netflix coming into the market and bringing an entirely different technology, an entirely different business model, that experience effect was of no benefit. It's just like that guy who can do fantastic journal entries by hand. The company then says, hey, listen, we're going automated. The great benefits associated, or the great experience advantage associated with journal entries by hand, is of no consequence now. Same thing that happened. IBM and HP and Compaq had great experience effects when it came to selling computers through intermediaries. Hey, I can create a computer, I could give it to the wholesaler, and that they can in turn sell it retail. They were not, that experience was of no effect or no benefit to them when Dell changed the business model with their technology of direct-to-customer selling. Same thing with Toyota. And we're going to use that Toyota example for the third one. Flexible manufacturing may allow small manufacturers to produce at a low unit cost. Again, the benefit of traditional experience effects requires the firm to produce at a larger scale. Why? The more I produce, the more economies of scale, the more learning effect I have. All right? However, if flexible technology, and what is flexible technology? You can read more in your text what flexible technology is, but it allows, essentially one of the benefits of flexible technology is allows the firm, to produce a greater diversity of products and services at lower prices. It gives you kind of the best of both worlds. You can get a level of customization, meaning and diversity in production, but also enjoy the benefits associated with mass manufacturing. Again, if you remember, when Ford started off building cars, they said, hey, you can have any car you want once it's black, right? You can have it any color you want once it's black. What that was trying to imply was, listen, we only make one type of car here. And the reason why we only make one type of car is because mass production is what is required traditionally for economies of scale and for learning effects. Again, if I've changed the production or I've changed the process, then I need a whole different type of learning. And so my learning effect is not in place. If I change the protocol of the production, my economies of scale go away, because that requires me a different type of investment to be made, a different fixed cost. Now I have to start the process over, if you will. Experience is only beneficial if I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. If I've changed in some manner, some significant manner, it is going to require the experience effect that I've learned in one is going to be difficult to translate into another. What flexible manufacturing has allowed us to do is to take the same benefits, the same cost reductions that we get through mass manufacturing, because that's one of the great benefits of mass manufacturing. If I produce the same of everything, you know, I get the discounts, I get the experience curve, economies of scale, and learning effect. But the disadvantage of producing the same of everything is that I don't have the customization and differentiation that will allow me to segment and target multiple markets. So if I happen to wanted a car that was a different shape and a different color than Ford's car, I wasn't going to be able to purchase one, and Ford was going to lose my business. So the advantage of mass manufacturing is that I get economies of scale, but I'm not able to necessarily customize. Flexible manufacturing has helped firms to do that. And one of the ways that it's helped firms to do that is to reduce setup costs significantly. In automobile manufacturing, one of the largest fixed costs was the setup cost. Trying to, for example, change the shape of an automobile. So automobiles parts are shaped by what's called dies. You know, they're pressed in. For example, so I want this type of door, I want, you know, this type of bonnet. I have to change the machinery. And before we had flexible technology, the cost associated with changing that die, you know, making it adaptable to another automobile, for example, was huge. Meaning, because you had long setup times, changing the machinery over, stopping production, and having to make all these changes, that when I made those changes, I would have had to produce a large amount of vehicles to excuse me, to make that setup time financially justifiable. So if I was shutting my business down for 4 days in order to change the dies, to change the setup, you know, set up differently for this new production, I was losing significant amounts, or spending significant amounts of money setting this thing up. Then I was going to have to produce a large amount of cars in order, or a large amount of parts in order to make that justifiable. All right. Now the American car manufacturers could do that, because obviously they were selling to the United States. It was a large market. Well, Toyota is a Japanese manufacturer, and they did not have that large amount of customers to sell to. So if they would have had to spend that same amount of time setting up and same amount of money setting up, if they produced, you know, 50,000 cars, 40,000 would have stayed in